Seems to think that Larry's mother is she's very close with this guy from the
Thank you all for coming today. We're here to honor the life and memory of our friend and loved one, Lawrence Teeter, and we really thank you all for coming out today. We'd like to take a moment of silent meditation to think about Larry and our fond memories of him, and our accompanist will play a piece of music, and we'll take a moment of silence, okay? Well, thank you. I've never done a eulogy before, so Larry was a dear and close friend of my mother and of myself for almost a decade, and like many other people who knew him well, we miss him very, very much. And I think really looking at Larry's life, you can see a testament to his stand for justice in the face of overwhelming power on the part of the government, and that he really took to heart the idea of standing up for oppressed people and for causes which needed a strong and vigorous advocate. He was truly a knight in the courts of justice, fighting the good fight for truth and justice, where there are very few people who spend their life and time dedicated to those ends. And I think every time Larry and I would discuss I'm Catholic, we would discuss Christ, he would say, well, Christ was a wonderful revolutionary. And I think the most revolutionary thing that he ever said was to love your neighbor as yourself. And Larry truly exemplified that, much more so than many people who profess to live by those standards, because he spent every day of his life dedicated to helping those who were not able to help themselves. From the Sirhan case, which has, taken the majority of Larry's love and devotion and energy for the last decade, to the plight of a woman injured by the Los Angeles Police Department during an anti-war demonstration whose eyesight was permanently damaged, and Larry took them on and successfully won for her, to numerous and countless small individuals with small criminal matters in the overall scheme of things that were very important and vital to their well-being and any capability they had of accessing justice in our system. And Larry took on both the small and the large cases with equal passion and vigor to do what was right and to defend the powerless. All of his many stands in the preservation issues in Los Angeles, for the Hollywood Bowl, to stop the Pacific Pipeline, to stop the proliferation of cell phone towers or throughout Southern California and all of the consequent health effects. Larry never tired or ceased from his course of labor to see to it that he would make a difference in this world in his own small, quixotic way, that he would be able to stand up for all of us in his capacities, in his incredible intelligence and brilliance as an attorney, and his motivation. And he would engage everyone everywhere we went on social occasions, in political dialogue, to get them to think about what was going on in the world about them and to care a little bit more than they had before he talked to them. And he was always a vigorous, enthusiastic proponent of the truth. And that's one thing that I think we can all take away from our memories of him, is his absolute joyousness in pursuing justice. He didn't do it with any kind of meanness or pettiness. It was a joyous, open heart with which he pursued justice. And even though he knew he was always taking on these Goliath-type odds, he did it anyway, and he did it vigorously, and he did it with a smile on his face. And that is the way I will always remember him, that he was a man of true conviction and honor and passion and courage. And that's, I think, in terms of eulogy, we can segue to the film. A friend of mine and I stayed up and edited a very short little bit of Larry speaking last year in the fall at the Coalition on Political Assassinations meeting, and also probably, I'd say, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, a few years ago, at another one of their conferences speaking on the case, and a few photos. So I'll go ahead and put that on, and we can take a few moments to listen to Larry in his own words.
Shot during the JFK assassination. And what they concluded on the basis of this statistical analysis was that John Kennedy was shot from different directions by multiple weapons. That's a conspiracy. The House Committee said there was a conspiracy. We don't know who did it. We're out of money, so we can't do any more research. But the one thing we can tell you is that it wasn't the CIA. I've asked, and Sir Hanson has asked about two of them, how we find the done for ourselves, to allow a similar analysis inside the pantry to take place, or the assassination occurred, before they destroyed the Ambassador Hotel. They failed to even respond to my request of certified plans to demolish the hotel. I plan to file a lawsuit against the demolition plan in the next several days. If this acoustical analysis were to go forward, I'm confident that the result would be that there was a conspiracy in that case just as there is in this one. The reason for that is that the autopsy report confirms that Sirhan was out of position and out of range, and that Robert Kennedy could not have been shot by Sirhan. The LAPD vandalized the crime scene and removed extra bullets, which confirm multiple guns were in use, and removed the objects from which these extra bullets were taken, ceiling panels and door frames, and then destroyed them right after the trial before the officials could even get off the ground. That's how confident they were about their case. They don't have a case. They made up a case. They covered up the truth. That's the same scenario as occurred here. There were multiple shooters, multiple assailants, extra bullets, extra guns, all destroyed, all suppressed.
Would like to speak with us today on the issue of the assassination of Robert Kennedy, Lawrence Teeter.
It's an honor to be here with you. We stand today on sacred ground at the site on which the President of the United States was murdered by the security services of the United States government to perpetuate the war in Vietnam, keep the war in Vietnam going, and perpetuate the Cold War. In 1968, Senator Robert Kennedy announced his candidacy for the presidency. His specific central campaign promise was that if elected President of the United States, he would pull U.S. forces out of Vietnam. When he won the California primary on June 4th, 1968, his nomination to the presidential candidacy of the Democratic Party was virtually assured. So was his election to the presidency. That night, June 5th, 1968, Robert Kennedy was killed. That put a stop to the capacity of the anti-war and civil rights forces of the United States to install or elect as president someone who would stop that war. That assassination guaranteed the continuation of the war. It guaranteed the election of Richard Nixon. It gave us everything that followed. I represent Sirhan Sirhan, the seventh victim of the conspiracy to murder Senator Robert Kennedy. In the case of John Kennedy, there continues to be controversy about the autopsy. Was the autopsy faked, or was it real, and was the body tampered with? Let me tell you why Congress was never willing to look at the Robert Kennedy case, unlike the other two. In the Robert Kennedy case, for one thing, there's an autopsy report which exonerates Sirhan, implicates someone else, and establishes conclusively a conspiracy, which means it blows away the official explanation. That autopsy report establishes that Sirhan was out of position and out of range and could not possibly have shot Robert Kennedy. That autopsy report was withheld from the defense for months until it was too late for the defense to use it in Sirhan's defense at the time of his trial. There was massive obstruction of justice by the police. The police learned early on that more bullets were fired in the pantry that could have come from Sirhan's gun. They learned this within 24 hours of the assassination, no later. Yet they continued to maintain, as they continue to maintain to this day, that only one person committed this crime, that only one gun was involved. We were able to establish that 4 guns were used, at least 4 guns were involved in this case. 3 of them have been destroyed. The 4th gun at the archives, we don't think is Sirhan's gun. We were able to establish that every single bullet introduced into evidence in Sirhan's trial was a faked, fabricated, forged bullet. We were able to establish that the police put together a comparison photomicrograph purporting to show a match between the Sirhan test bullet and the bullet removed from Senator Kennedy's neck. And that those bullets actually used in that photograph were faked victim bullets. They matched 2 faked victim bullets to fabricate against Sirhan. We're able to establish that the Los Angeles Police Department seized the only photographs taken of the assassination, and that 2,410 photographs were incinerated in a hospital incinerator by the LAPD in August of '68, within less than 3 months of the assassination. We're able to establish that the police test-fired multiple guns in the case and extracted bullets from multiple guns, test bullets, as though they recovered multiple guns in the case. They never, at the crime scene, they never acknowledged this. The second gun that they test-fired was, in fact, a gun that was in police custody before the assassination, which circumstantially implicates the LAPD, not only in obstruction of justice, not only in a cover-up, but in the assassination of Senator Kennedy himself. What happened to that gun? It was destroyed in July, next month after the assassination. We were able to establish that in all probability, Sirhan wasn't even conscious of what was happening at the time that this crime was committed. The top expert in hypnosis in the United States, Dr. Herbert Spiegel, who teaches at Columbia University, has given us a declaration, which is now on file with the Supreme Court of the state of California, establishing that in all probability, Sirhan was unconscious at the time of the assassination, and was acting in accordance with hypnotic programming administered before the assassination. We have massive evidence to prove all of this. I would say that there are disturbing similarities between all of these crimes, all of the 3 major assassinations of the 60s. In each case, the victim opposed the war in Vietnam and stood as an opponent who could create real problems for the military's desire to continue the war in Vietnam. In each case, the government has covered up.
There is a chance. I've got a good case. The law never says that. They're directing me to who to the cops.
Right.
I mean, clearly they're just doing the bidding of the LAPD.
That's right.
One agency of the city is doing the bidding of another. Imagine if people destroying a building of that magnificence.
That's what I was talking about.
Well, the idea is to get rid of the memory. And vandalize the crime scene so it doesn't exist, so we can't do the acoustical test. That's what they're afraid of. The acoustical test proves the conspiracy. We don't know who did it, we can't solve it, but it wasn't the CIA. That's what they did.
Okay, I'd like to read now a letter that was sent to us by John Judge of the Coalition on Political Assassinations. And they're planning to present Larry posthumously with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his work in the Robert Kennedy assassination. And so I'll just go ahead and briefly read that. This is to give praise and acknowledgement to someone who is sadly no longer among us, but whose life was committed to justice and exposing police and government agencies that carried out criminal acts, as well as other defense attorneys who failed to carry out their duties. Lawrence Larry Teeter, Esquire, died of cancer this summer after a long illness. Larry Teeter joined the Coalition on Political Assassinations in the 1990s after becoming the defense attorney for Sirhan Bishara Sirhan. At that point, despite numerous books, documentary films like The Second Gun, magazine articles, and other reviews of the evidence that pointed to a different assassin of Robert F. Kennedy, the case lay fallow for a long time, and Sirhan languished in jail while the real killers remained free. Larry stepped into that breach and worked closely with other researchers into the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy to find a viable new legal defense for Sirhan. Larry studied ballistics evidence, police misconduct, the LAPD cover-up, the connections to organized crime and the CIA, and the evidence for mind control manipulation of Sirhan at the time of the shooting. He discovered new evidence and worked hard to force a new appeal and hearing to Sirhan's wrongful conviction. And that appeal was never fully heard by the time he died. Larry attended and spoke at every COPA conference he could in Memphis, Los Angeles, and Dallas, and co-sponsored the LA meeting this June, acting as director of the Committee for the Preservation of Assassination Sites. This group was working on a legal ruling to bar the destruction of the Hotel Ambassador where RFK was shot, and to allow fresh ballistics and acoustics examinations and tests in the pantry where the assassination happened in 1968. Those issues became moot following a court decision allowing the building to be replaced with a school to be named after Robert F. Kennedy. Larry was upset about the changes made to Dealey Plaza and the destruction of the physical site of the Martin Luther King assassination by the National Civil Rights Museum, which have made recreation of the actual shooting almost impossible. Let's see. I won't read the entire letter, but Larry, a criminal defense attorney, took pro bono cases and defended Sirhan without adequate pay or compensation because he believed in a justice, as Raymond Chandler once described it, that is cold and clear and crisp, and that we dream about, but we never see. Near the end of his life, he was harassed by the LAPD as well, who attempted to enter his house upon false pretenses when he was bedridden. Even in his illness, he forced himself out of bed in 2-hour meetings. His death will hopefully motivate others among us to take up where he left off. Larry's legacy lives on with Sirhan and his families, with the friends who will maintain his website and archive his papers, and with other victims of the events of June 6, 1968, like Paul Schrade, who applauded his efforts in the case. It is the responsibility of each of us to pursue the justice he tried to win, legally, socially, and politically, in regard to the major assassinations of the last decades, as well as the many other inequalities and harms that cry out for our attention. It lives on for us in Copa in his sense of humor and generous nature in sharing what he knew about the truth. Robert F. Kennedy once said that he did not look at things as they were and ask why, but instead he dreamed of things as they could be and asked why not. I know from our long talks about politics and American society that Larry shared this politics of imagination that is really our only hope. It is only fitting that we honor our brother and friend in this cause with the Sylvia Meager Award, letting him join the ranks of other lifetime truth seekers like Harold Weisberg, Peter Dale Scott, and Penn Jones, Jr. And I'd like to, if anyone would like to come up, I know Tony and yes, would like to come up and say a few words about his brother, and then after that other people would like to share. I believe Millie has some words written by Larry's mother also to share with us.
Thank you for being here. I am Lawrence's brother, and when I heard that there was going to be this memorial, I set down some words which I'm going to read, which will be my remembrances of the good things about my brother Lawrence. Lawrence was a passionate man, but he was especially passionate about 3 things. First, he was passionate about the law, his chosen profession. He loved to argue a point, laying argument on argument, until all who disagreed with him were either vanquished by his brilliance or exhausted by his zeal. He was one who, had he been a wealthy man, would probably gladly have paid for the privilege of arguing his point of view. His skill was a benefit to those who engaged his services as a lawyer, regardless of their ability to pay. To him, if the cause was just, the effort would be expended, without much concern for reimbursement. His clients paid what they could in money and kind, and Lawrence was appreciated by the people he had helped or served at all levels in our society. Second, he was passionate about music, especially Johann Sebastian Bach. He was a precocious child, and he started playing the piano at age 5 and soon thereafter developed an interest in the pipe organ. By the age of 12, he walked or took the bus to neighborhood churches that had pipe organs and pestered the pastor or the organist to allow him to play on their grand organs. He was usually dismissed as a child, but he persevered, and tenacity, later to be one of his greatest assets as an attorney, was developed even then. Once he had won over the people in the church, he would sit at the great organs, hands straining to reach the 4 or more keyboards, his feet barely reaching the pedal boards, and out would pour Bach, to the astonishment of all who could hear. Later in life, he would journey to Europe and play on the organ that Bach had played on and composed on in Germany, and he also traveled to the church where Albert Schweitzer played and ministered before he returned to medical school and became a missionary in Africa. Third, he was passionate about politics. He followed the nuances of local, state, national, and international politics. He had an informed opinion about nearly everything that you or I might read about in any newspaper or magazine on any given day. His leanings were to the left, of course, having had parents and at least one grandparent that were socialists. That said, he was his own man and did not follow any political ideology into the absurd, always weighing the reality of the political view against the rhetoric accompanying it. Part of his passion for things political led him to become an expert on some of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century: the deaths of John and Robert Kennedy and of Martin Luther King. He became especially interested in the death of Robert Kennedy at the Ambassador Hotel in 1968, 37 years ago. The evidence never quite added up. Perhaps too many bullets were fired. Too many suspicious people were present at the scene. Later, critical evidence was lost or destroyed. Witnesses disappeared. He refused to consider writing a book about what he had found, as he felt that to do so would compromise his client, who had been the sole person convicted for this assassination. He was my brother. We disagreed about many things, but only to a degree. We both shared the essential beliefs that all men are created equal and entitled to the benefits of our Constitution. He was a passionate man. He will be greatly missed.
Hello, thanks for coming. My name's Dylan Way, and Larry was my uncle, Uncle Lawrence to me, at 8 a.m. on a Sunday to talk politics. I just wanted to read a couple quick notes for people that couldn't be here. The first is from Southwestern Law School, just letting us know they're all addressed to my grandma. Dear Mrs. Teeter, I was sorry to learn of your son's passing. I wish to extend my condolences to you and your family for your great loss. As a memorial tribute, a book selection has been made in memory of Lawrence G. Teeter. A commemorative book plate has been placed in the newly acquired book by Samuel Walker, Civil Liberties in America, a Reference Handbook. A copy of the book plate is attached. We are honored to add this book to our collection in memory of your son. The next letter is from Terry Moore from Kansas City, Missouri. I was very sorry to learn via email of the passing of your son, Lawrence. Please accept my deepest sympathy. In my study of the political assassinations of the 1960s, I came to know, admire, and respect Larry at research conferences throughout the year, Memphis, Los Angeles, and Dallas. I had the opportunity to speak with him at length. In April, on a Saturday evening, a group of us unwound at a nice dinner on the famous Beale Street in Memphis. In June, despite being quite ill with what we thought was a bad cold, Larry addressed the COPA conference in LA. He did not want to disappoint those who had traveled to the West Coast to hear his presentation. As you know, that was the way Larry was. Please know there are many of us who will miss him greatly. This is from Paul and Barbara Harris. Dear Marion, you were fortunate to have a son who made the world a better place for all of us, and to have had such a loving and close relationship. Lawrence will remain in our memories, in our hearts, and in our good works. Chris, do you want to come up here?
Hello, I'd also like to thank everyone for being here. My name is Chris Way, and Lawrence is also my uncle Lawrence. And I just think it's really nice for you all to have come and for us to share in his memory together today. He's a really special guy. I also have some letters to read, but there's a couple things I'd like to share about him. And for me, the particular things, of the things that my father mentioned, politics, law, and music, for me, Lawrence and I, we would always talk about music, because I love music, and he's a really inspiring person if you're interested in music, and particularly the music of J.S. Bach. And I remember this one experience I'd like to share with you all, that he was at an assassination conference in Memphis, Tennessee, and I happened to be studying there that year, and I was studying music, And I was practicing pretty late one night. I was playing the xylophone, and the only other people in this building were me and one of my instructors who was practicing as well. And Lawrence, he had come by to visit me throughout the course of his stay there, and he knew where the building was, and he just happened to drop by, and we were talking for a few minutes, and then he grabbed one of the mallets, and my instructor came into the room, and he started playing some of the themes of the fugues of J.S. Bach on the xylophone. And he was just so thrilled with, oh, look at the xylophone, and tell me if you know this theme, for which fugue this is, you know. So he would play the theme, and then he would talk about it, and then he would play all the canons of the theme, and then all the variations of the theme. And we were there for 5 hours until 2 in the morning talking to my instructor. And we didn't go through all of the fugues and well time. I mean, we didn't go through all of Bach's fugues, but it's just really, it's amazing to see someone who is that knowledgeable about music that's that sophisticated. The guy was a total genius, and I really admire him for that. But it's really rare when people have that kind of understanding. And this professor, you should have seen the look in his face. It was a really special moment. So some of the other things people have said in these letters, all these nice letters that all of Lawrence's friends have sent my grandmother. Lawrence, this is from Carrie Gillett. Lawrence left a legacy of kindness and caring everywhere he went. It was his path to be of service, using his immeasurable skills for those who could not help themselves. It was my pleasure to return some of that back to him in those days when he was the one who needed help. Here's from Joan Mellon. I was planning to meet Larry in Dallas in November, and when I mentioned it to him again in June, he grew very quiet. I didn't have any idea that he was so ill because he sounded like himself. He was a dear and a lovely man, a person of principles and integrity, a person who didn't compromise when he believed in something. There are very few people on this level of moral distinction. Larry set an example of moral distinction and rectitude. Several times he spoke to me of his indignation that people would be challenging Dr. Thomas Noguchi on his Robert Kennedy autopsy. Larry was steadfast. It was such an outrage that this honest doctor should be questioned. I remember Larry saying that Dr. Noguchi was the one bright example in this whole case. So I always look forward to Larry's calls. It was always a pleasure to talk to him. I was sad yesterday, but I am even more sad today. There can be no consolation to losing a child I know. I wanted to write and tell you how much I admire Larry and that I will miss him very much. Here's one from Karen Croft. Dear Miss Teeter, I met your son Larry in Dallas last November when I was there with David Talbot. We heard Larry speak eloquently and forcefully about his work in the Sirhan case. He was the most impressive speaker that week. I was saddened at his death, and I can only hope that the work David and other researchers do will in some way pay respects to Larry's passion for justice. We will have a special memorial for him at the Kennedy Conference in November in Washington. I hope to meet you one day. All my best, Karen Croft. So thank you again all for coming.
Is there anyone else who would like to? Oh, I'm sorry, Millie, of course. Some thoughts written by Mrs. Teeter.
These are words written by Marion, Lawrence's mother, and I'm very happy to read them for her. My son, Lawrence, was strong-minded from early childhood. The small supermarket near near us had shelves filled with slick front-page magazines with McCarthyite and Cold War lies, and he regularly went to that store and placed the most inflammatory of them at the bottom of the pile. Around age 12, he started organ lessons, and every Sunday a.m. went by bus to the various churches in the area to hear and to examine their organs. I thought he'd grow up to be a monk. He was entranced in high school and college by pictures of the magnificent cathedrals abroad. His father, a World War II Navy GI, and I, then a carpenter, scraped together, with my help, money to help him in college, take a law course in the London Inns of Court, and to visit all the great English cathedrals, also the art museums in the Soviet Union, and later get to Germany, where he located the town and the church where Bach spent many years. He knocked on doors nearby and found the current organist for the church, who allowed him to enter and to sit at Bach's organ, a sacred site for Lawrence. In later years back home, he often talked to fellow concert goers about his indignation over the fact that Bach was put in prison for a month when he refused to add increased academic teaching duties to his already very heavy workload of performance and composing. And further indignation over the fact that when Bach died, his widow had no means of support and was left homeless. About age 18, he helped organize a major demonstration against the Vietnam War. The planning group met in our backyard. The event in Century City, where hundreds of young people and their middle-class, affluent families, teachers and parents were gassed, beaten, and arrested by the police, became a major turning point in President Lyndon Johnson's decision to not seek re-election. Soon after, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, a foe of the war and a friend to labor and minorities, became the leading candidate, and in a victory rally at the Ambassador Hotel was assassinated, a crime falsely pinned on Sirhan B. Sirhan. Larry devoted much of the last 10 years of his life to exposing this fallacious trial and life imprisonment of Sirhan and the likelihood of government involvement. Larry was filled with a zest for life. He had enormous compassion and tenderness for those most deprived and victimized by society, and enormous outrage at the forces creating injustice and maltreatment of people who were the most exploited and helpless. These were the driving energies of his life, along with his devotion to environmental protections. When I became handicapped by a stroke a year ago, this is his mother, Marion, he was determined that my life should be as happy and well cared for as he could make it, rearranging my little house so that I could continue to live in it, visiting me several times a week to supply my needs. And he called me daily by phone, all in the midst of his very busy schedule and the beginnings of his illness, which neither of us were aware of until many months later. He remained optimistic about an early recovery, had excellent care in the Tijuana hospital, had little pain, and had the constant support of 2 devoted, longtime friends who came to be with him. His only worry was that his 10-year struggle to secure justice for Sirhan in the Robert Kennedy assassination would be interrupted. When he was finally convinced that this would not happen, he seemed reassured and at peace. and still expected to be back at work in a few months. The following slogan from William Lloyd Garrison, founder of the Liberator and leader of the Emancipation Movement, expresses what Lawrence stood for. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard. And that's from Lawrence's mother. Yes. I just want to say for myself that I knew mostly about Lawrence through his mother, and I don't want to repeat this, but I'm here not only because of his mother, and she's a dear friend, but because of him.
Hello, I'm Geneva, and I came to know Larry through my daughter, Summer, and we became friends. I know we had differences of belief, but Larry came to know God in his own way at the end. And the last words we said to each other when I finally got through to his hospital room in Tijuana, I was so overjoyed when I finally made it. I went spontaneously, "Oh, God bless you, Larry." And his answer was, "God bless you too. Who is this?" And I'm glad we had that moment. And then I was looking for something brief to read that would capture, and at the risk of repeating, I can't help picking this one moment if I can read it well enough. One of them, a lawyer, spoke up, "Sir, which is the most important command in the laws of Moses?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second and most important is similar. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. All the other commandments and all the demands of the prophets stem from these two laws and are fulfilled if you obey them. Keep only these, and you will find that you are obeying all the others." This fell open in the car on the way down to this spot, and it captured for me the simplicity of it all, because more than any man who professes religion, Larry loved his neighbor as he loved himself. In many ways, I think he loved his neighbor better than he loved himself. And in that regard, he's an inspiration to all of us who struggle with the weaknesses of our own human nature. And beyond that, I'm grateful to have known him. I miss him. I miss talking with him about politics on the phone. I miss having dinner in Chinese restaurants, which shrimp with walnuts will never be the same again. And I can't listen to KPFK or the classical music stations without thinking fondly of him and missing him almost daily. And and then there was one funny thing that we shared, because I'm also a lover of Bach and Baroque music generally. He took us to a Yo-Yo Ma concert once where we thought we would enjoy this splendid musician's talent. But for Bach lovers, it was a unique experience. It was entirely solo, atonal music. There wasn't a melody to be had for the entire evening. And for Bach lovers, this was devastating. And we managed to get through it by cracking jokes for the entire evening. And that one moment has stood out for us. He never tired of making jokes with my daughter or myself when it would come up. And to this day, I cannot hear a mention of Yo-Yo Ma on the radio or see news of him on the TV without cracking up and laughing. So these are just some of the human, intimate, personal, touching sides that go beyond the politics and the ambitions and goals and hopes that he was also just a very warm, loving, personal friend. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to share some thoughts or memories about Lawrence?
Forgive me, I'm sight impaired. Good afternoon. My name is Leo Branton. I am a lawyer. Before I became sight impaired, I would read the newspaper from cover to cover every morning. But the first thing that I would read would be the obituary page, because if I didn't see my name in there, I knew it was all right to get up. But anyhow, on the day that this article appeared about Larry, my brother called me from Northridge, where he lives, to tell me about the passing of Larry. To say that I was unhappy about this is an understatement. I first met Larry shortly after he became a member of the bar. He had sought me out because he was new at the bar, and he knew that I had practiced for quite some considerable period of time and had handled many cases involving constitutional issues, including representing members before the Un-American Activities Committee and representing 3 of the Communist Party leaders who were indicted for a conspiracy to advocate the violent overthrow of the government, who all got convicted, but we got all of their convictions reversed by the United States Supreme Court. I first helped Larry on a case that he was handling on appeal, and I think it was the Hillside Strangler case. I believe that was the case he was handling. In any event, I am a trial lawyer. I try to see to it that no appeal is necessary. But unfortunately, appeals are necessary in many, 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 many cases. Whenever I had a case of my own where there was a conviction, I would seek Larry's help to help me with the appeal. Larry and I have been working on 2 cases recently. Both of these cases are pro bono. And for those of you who are not lawyer or not familiar with Latin, pro bono means for free. Our first case was a case involving a black man who escaped from a Georgia chain gang when he was 18 years old and came to California. 18 people made that escape. They caught 17 of them, all but the one man who found haven here in California. Finally, he got picked up for riding a bicycle without a light at night. And as a result of that, his name was in the system, in the computer system, and they saw that he was wanted for jailbreak 20 years earlier. The unfortunate thing about this being 20 years later that they're trying to take this man back to Georgia, he then had developed incurable AIDS. I was asked to represent him, and the first thing that I did was to ask Larry if he would help me to represent this man. And I explained to Larry that it was without fee, but Larry said, "Leo, but the issue is just, and you can count on my help." We handled this case on appeal before the District Court of Appeals, and we got a 2-to-1 decision. Unfortunately, the 2-to-1 decision was against us. And when the case was over, I thanked Larry for his help on the case, which had been tremendous, and said, "I guess there's nothing else we can do." He said, no, there is, Leo. I'm going to file a petition for writ of habeas corpus in the federal court. I said, "Larry, it's a waste of time you're doing that." He said, "Leo, I'm going to file a petition for writ of habeas corpus in the federal court, and I'm going to put your name on it along with mine." And he did that. Well, while that petition was pending, the Georgia officials came and kidnapped this man and took him back to Georgia. I got in touch with the head of the NAACP, who was from Georgia, and asked him what would he think he could do, because he was a good friend of the then governor. The governor said he would look into it, and I don't know whether the governor looked into it or not, but I know that they didn't want to keep this man with AIDS in a Georgia prison because caring for him and the medical expenses was too great. And while the petition was pending in the district court to get him freed, the governor of Georgia decided to release him and send him back home. So that's one that we won without having to get a court order on it. We are presently involved in a case where a man was unfairly convicted and unfairly represented by his lawyer. I have never seen a case where a lawyer had committed so many errors in the trial in my whole 56 years of practice. And I was asked to handle that case, and I immediately again called upon Larry to help me. And Larry and I discussed the case, and I said, Larry, I see 4 constitutional violations in this case. He said, no, Leo, there are not 4 constitutional violations in this case. There are 7 constitutional violations in this case. I said, Larry, you have a way of seeing everything that the government does is unconstitutional. Doesn't the government ever do anything that's correct? He said, not often. Anyhow, on that case, we appealed to the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit ruled against us, and then we filed a petition for writ of habeas corpus in the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court sent it back for resentencing because the man had been resentenced under an unconstitutional law. I have to go to court on that case Monday, tomorrow. Larry, why in the world would you leave me alone to handle this case? I need you, my friend, but the fight still goes on. And whatever I do in connection with this case, I will remember Larry's tutoring, that he will always be at my elbow when I argue this case. Larry, it is said by many people who came up here that he was very passionate about the law. I go further. He was passionate about the Constitution. There is more in the law than the Constitution, but this was his forte, this was his strength, this was his passion. And those of us who are still practicing law could only take a chapter out of Larry's life. And let me tell you something else I said to Larry. He was sending me copies of everything he would file in the Sirhan case, time after time after time. So I finally said to him, Larry, why don't you give up? You are never going to get this man out of prison. The political aspect of it, the legal aspect of it, all of these things are against you. You are never going to get him out. You're wasting a lot of your time. He said, Leo, I will never give up. And he never did.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Hirsch. I had no idea that Larry studied with Leo Branton, and now I know another reason why he was so brilliant. Leo, as most of you here know, is one of the finest lawyers to ever grace the courts of our state or our country. I met Larry about 20-some years ago when I was assigned to represent a young man, a gang member from Venice in a death penalty case. He was charged with killing a woman named Sarai Ribicoff, who was the niece of Abraham Ribicoff, then the United States Senator from Connecticut. She happened to also be a reporter for the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, and I see a few people in here old enough to remember the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, which was one of our 2 local newspapers. Every day for approximately a year, there was a front page article called the Ribicoff Murder Report, where they carried stories about the case even if nothing was going on. Just to say that it was 20 days or 40 days since the death of this young woman in a very unfortunate killing in the west side of Los Angeles. Larry was then a law student. I don't remember how he was brought to me, but it was a godsend. He came to my office and asked to work on the case. I didn't realize that he'd do work pro bono. I guess I paid him. I didn't have to. I realize now. But it was a pleasure to pay Larry. And Larry and I came up with the idea that this young man who was charged with the death penalty really wasn't eligible for the death penalty, because there were many cases in Los Angeles where people were tried murders and the district attorney did not seek the death penalty. So Larry and I went and got all of the death penalty cases that have been charged in the previous 20 years. And Larry sat in my office day and night and worked on these files and put together, I'll never forget them, these color-coded charts with the different fact situations of each case, why some were worse than ours factually and death was not sought, and why some were much less egregious than ours, and so forth. And we brought this to court. I'll never forget, sometimes I come to work in the morning and Larry had been there all night. And I see this nice picture of Larry looking tan and healthy. I don't think he ever saw the light of day. When I first knew him, he would live in my office. I'd come in the morning, there'd be glasses of water all over the library and all over the office, all over my desk, because he'd be drinking water all night and working on these cases and doing research. He'd have his bare feet, he'd be padding around the office. Remember his feet? I'll never forget those white feet, because Larry just didn't have his shoes off during the day, and he was just working. We went to court and weren't able to get the death penalty stricken from the case, but we did manage to save this young man's life, and I think it was in no small part due to Larry's efforts on his behalf. He sent me, Leo, all the Sirhan briefs as well, and I still have them in my office, and I would sometimes call him up. He'd say, well, what'd you think of it? What'd you think of it? I say, well, don't call the judge an idiot. Just tone it down a little bit, Larry, and think of something a little more diplomatic. And he said, well, that's the way I felt at the time, and I just put it in there. I knew I wasn't going to really use that in the final papers. But he was passionate, if nothing else. And Mr. Sirhan, Bashara Sirhan, has lost a great defender in losing Larry, and we've all lost a very good friend and a wonderful lawyer. It's a pleasure to be here.
Would anyone else like to share? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Kathy Knight. I just want to say that Larry was a great defender of the environment, too. He's helped us save the Bayona wetlands. And we have a case going on now to bring out the truth about Playa Vista being built at the Bayona wetlands. It's one of the worst gas seeps in the world, and it was a total cover-up on allowing that to be built there and the danger there. And we have a case pending at the appellate court now. And we had 2 attorneys on the case, but Larry's argument is our best argument. The appellate court gave a tentative decision saying that they're going for that argument, and his argument is that they have to pull water out from underneath the gas membranes there, and they did no study what that's going to do to subsidence. And the court agreed with him, and we're still waiting for the final decision. But I always knew that Larry just said always, for like the 4 or 5 years we've had that case going, that's the argument, So he's really smart, even on the California Environmental Quality Act. And we both went to Berkeley, as far as I know. I think he did graduate from Berkeley. I mean, that's what he told me, I think. Anyway, I just think he's wonderful, and he passed away on my birthday, and I feel it's a sad connection, but I like that connection. Thank you.
Okay, Valerie? And then you, okay.
My name is Valerie Stewart, and I met Larry Teeter, I think in the early 90s. Is that right, John? Early 90s, when the theater that my parents founded, the Ebony Showcase Theater, was being taken by the government and eminent domain. And Larry and friends would come and they would try to tell us what was happening, tell us about the redevelopment, tell us about the redevelopment agencies, tell us about the things that were going on. And at that time, I, like other people, did not believe that what was happening to us could possibly happen. And I think that Larry and friends associated with Larry helped to make an activist out of me, helped to make me into a person that once our theater was taken and once the government had done their dastardly deed, I decided, because of that influence, to assist other people. And now Carol Knapp, who's sitting in the back, and I have a website devoted to helping those who've been affected negatively by the takings that are going on with frequency. Also, I was able to help to convince Larry that he needed a website, to convince Larry that the internet was not quite a dangerous place as he was afraid that it was. And I'm now the webmaster of Larry's website. I would hope that you would speak to me afterwards if you have something that you would like to say or contribute to the website, because we are dedicated to maintaining not only Larry's memory, but to continue his work with the Sirhan case, as well as I think we will expand it to link to information about environmental injustice and into information about takings. Larry was extremely concerned with and attended and hosted and spoke at many meetings to educate the public, to educate the normal people, to fight for people who were about to lose their property. So I'm very thankful that I met Larry, very thankful to have been a friend. He was a real friend. I was there to the end with him, visiting him, even caring for him in whatever way I could during the last few days of his life. And finally was able to, before he left for Mexico, to tell him I loved him. And I do. I really love him. He was a dear friend. And hopefully we can all continue together his work, his legacy, and his memory on the internet. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we have multiple people who still want to speak on Larry. Here we go.
My name is Paul Schrade. I also count myself as one of Larry's good friends. We worked a lot together on the Kennedy assassination case. I probably got started earlier than he did. I was a victim of that night and was wounded in the head. And for a long time, I had no questions about the case at all. Allard Lowenstein, former congressman who also was killed, got me involved, and I was able to file a lawsuit against Sirhan and any others who might be involved. It wasn't really against Sirhan, it was to pry our way into the case. And fortunately, we had people like Mel Levine and Jeff Cowan as lawyers to work on the case. We were able to get the records that were used in the prosecution of the case, and were able to get certain information that way. It took 20 years to get the files out of the police department. Finally, we did in 1988 because one of Kennedy's friends was on the police commission, Barbara Schley, and she said, you've got to really put on a real media event here if you're going to get those files. Well, we did. And I've got a lot of stories about that, but fortunately Mayor Tom Bradley interceded and we were able to get those files out of the police department. Incomplete, of course. There was a lot destroyed, a lot we never would see and never will see, and they're now in the state archives. Larry has done really great work on this case. I've worked with him over the years. I knew he was passionate about the law and the Constitution, as Leo says, but also about Bach. One of the first things he told me, that he played the organ and loved Bach, and I do too. And so we had those a few things in common. It's wonderful to hear from the family today and to others who knew him somewhat better than I did. We did have one disagreement, and it wasn't because of anything either of us did. He was after acoustical tests in the assassination site in the Ambassador Hotel. I've been working since 1987 to get that property turned into a memorial to Robert Kennedy and what he stood for in terms of economic and social justice. He was one of the finest candidates, if not the best candidate we ever had for President of the United States, and we lost him that night. And so it was a long struggle, and we finally were able to convince the school board that the hotel be removed. I'm a member of the LA Conservancy and will stay a member, even though I disagreed with them seriously on their effort to save the hotel. It has no architectural value. The architect who did it does have good works here at Occidental College. The Huntington Museum are good works. He did the Rose Bowl and the seating in the Hollywood Bowl. Those ought to be preserved. This hotel it was a dilapidated condition, had been ignored and not maintained for many, many years, and was going to cost $100 million to tear it apart and down to its concrete structure, 85-year-old concrete, and we know what that means in terms of reinforcement. It's cost $100 million of very scarce school funds to do that, and we saw no reason that we ought to support that. So I disagree with the Conservancy on that. As far as the assassination site is concerned, I did talk to district people about allowing the acoustical tests in there, but they were adamant that they were not going to allow that on a voluntary basis, that Larry would have to go to court and get a court order to do that, and that didn't happen. That hotel is probably coming down next month, and unfortunately those acoustical tests are not going to be made. There's still plenty of evidence that we have on the second gun theory that is in the record. The record our group made over 20 years of working on the case, the record that Larry made and others have made, even Ted Chirac's work on it. Even though he was quite difficult to work with, he did a lot of good work. So there's a lot of good work there. And the problem is the politics of this country, the government agencies that we had to work with, are not really giving us a fair break on this. Justice has not been done in this case, and hopefully Sirhan will get a reasonably good attorney to keep the case going. And I hope Valerie keeps the website going. I visited again recently. I have all of his files on the Sirhan case, of course, and as others have said they had. And these records are important, and all of Larry's records are important. Lately, my meetings with Larry were with John Meyer, who was a chief aide to Howard Hughes. And he'd been doing a documentary on Howard Hughes and also about the RFK assassination, and had supplied Larry with information. We had 2 meetings with John Meyer. He lives in Vancouver, but he was down here and had a couple of extra meetings with Larry and provided him with a great deal of information that I think is important in this case, and that information ought to be preserved as well. So my love for Larry, I feel very deeply. I'm pleased I was here today to hear new dimensions about Larry's life and his work. His work was good work, and I'm proud to say that I tried to be helpful to him as much as I could. Let's keep him in our hearts. He's a wonderful man.
I've been videotaping Larry for a number of years, and in particular at the COPA conferences in Dallas. I've also been at the Memphis one, but I don't remember for sure that he was there, but I believe he was. And also at the RFK conferences John Judge does here in LA. My name's Ralph Cole. And there were a couple other events, one at LA Trade Tech where he spoke for a class and I taped him there, and then at the Onion in the Valley, and there's probably been a few others. I've enjoyed knowing Larry quite a bit. I've been to his house to take DVDs and tapes and stuff, and he's been to mine to pick stuff up, and it's just been a real pleasure to see somebody that dedicated. I just found out about, I taped him last at the RFK conference in June across the street from the ambassador at the hotel there, and I was quite shocked about 2 weeks ago when my son said that he'd seen an email that Larry had died, because I didn't hear it. I was in a cancer ward myself at that time. Fortunately, my prognosis is much better than apparently Larry's was at the time. Well, obviously. And my tumor is clearing up nicely. But I sure wish we'd compared notes these last few months, because I had no idea he was, well, that ill. He'd always been shaky, but I didn't know he was what he had or anything like that. So I'm sorry I didn't establish a closer relationship with him. I just mentioned that because Larry's work was so important to him, and it was so important to many of us, that I want people to know about the tapes that he has that we've made. And I'm sure there are other people that have videos of his work as well, but they were very systematic. They were really geared toward the layperson understanding the complexities of it, and they are powerful tools. And the video of this memorial will come with 4 or 5 hours of those tapes. So for the $3, you have a tool. And it's very difficult to just take over and get them out without the people that are knowledgeable of the case to help do that. So I'm just making you aware of that the reason we do the DVDs for $3 instead of $13 is that people can pick them up and move them around and pass important information. And I do a lot of events where it's not nearly as important as this, so I felt with some trepidation I should come up here and just mention that this tool is available, because this is an important use for what I do a lot of that's less important. Thank you.
Maybe I don't need this. Hello, everyone. My name's John Obashan. I'm here today for Larry, for deep love of Larry, and also, unfortunately, another dear friend of Larry's apparently cannot be with us today, Michelle Grumet. And I just want to express some things about Larry that, from more of a personal knowledge of Larry. For the last 16 years, the weeks that Larry was here in Los Angeles and I would be in Los Angeles, I'd probably see Larry 4, 5, 10, 20 times every week. I knew Larry through our activities on the Coalition Against the Pipeline, which fought the renewed infrastructure for oil refining in our basin for the foreseeable future. It was fought out in the late 80s and early 90s in cases against the Pacific Pipeline, against ARCO, against Chevron, against Mobil. Remember Larry's wit about the PR person for Mobil. His name was Carburini, and he nicknamed him aptly Carburetor to go with the whole fossil fuel burning. Larry also was a big part of our efforts after the civil disturbances, when the redevelopment agency came in and wanted to take initially in the city of Los Angeles 65 square miles whole under the power of eminent domain and the power to massively indebt us and bondedness, and then generally exclude the community. Larry was a real lawyer. I say that as one with a law degree myself, and was able to assist him from time to time. But I want to say that Larry's life has, for me, a lot of big lessons. First of all, his joviality amidst everything. Trait I came to learn that he felt especially appreciated from his father. He kept a picture of himself as a boy and his father on his mantle in his house through all time. And he really cherished his relationship with his pop, with his dad. I'd like to also say that Larry was really funny. I remember one time he had a new roof finally put on the house. And the contract clearly called for plywood. And they were out there, the contractor was out there putting presswood on that roof. And I said, Larry's in there working away on a brief. And I said, Larry, you know. And finally, after much effort, he finally came outside to see that, you know, on his own contract, on his own deal he was getting. And he took proper amends. I'd like to say also it's good to see a lot of people today that I have not met. And it's good that we're all here today. And on that point, Larry would work all hours of the day and night. A new associate that comes on with a big law firm is often expected to bill, say, 2,000, maybe as much as 2,400 hours in a year's time. That's time that the law firm, hopefully in good conscience, can say, we actually worked on this client or that client's case. I would dare say that Larry Teeter probably worked in the vicinity of 5,000 plus billable hours every year. It was not unusual for Larry Teeter to work until he would crash, and that's how he would express it. He worked in his front room, rather barren, playing Bach. He was also, despite our best efforts, more concerned about a sort of bug that we're kind of more concerned about. Other types of bugs, Larry was type, but that was Larry. And he worked so hard. And then he would crash on his futon on the floor and get back up again in a few hours. How many times Larry Teeter got papers filed at Superior Court in the nick of time? Was a testament to luck. I mean, this guy is unbelievable. And as his health was failing, and with the consequent weight and other problems, how he would struggle, but he would make it again and again and again. We were fighting the Mobil pipeline case, a big case before Judge Sohigian in Superior Court. This was before the civil disturbances, so we're talking 91 at the time. Latham & Watkins, one of the most powerful firms in this town, in this country, let's face it, had 3, 4, 5, in different days, attorneys present arguing their side. And in addition, against Larry alone on the other side, and to some extent, I think that's how Larry kind of liked it, but to some extent, and not to repeat myself, the Latham & Watkins crowd, behind them sat a senior partner, very distinguished man, very distinguished, looked presidential. And all he did was sit there and kind of look at the judge. I mean, he wasn't looking at us. And we couldn't help to think that, basically, do you want to be in the club or don't you want to be in the club? Judge. You know, is there life after judgeship, or do you want to go appellate? Do you want to go higher? Whatever. Who knows? I mean, who could read minds? I can't read minds. All he just knows is this man was doing nothing other than sitting here looking at the judge all night. And this is the kind of stuff, you know, Larry, I mean, that joviality, I mean, even in later, you know, one time he sat down in Superior Court and a chair broke and under him and everything. And I mean, this guy was a riot, walking riot, you know. I mean, he shared with us how he was, you know, when you work that hard, I mean, the practice has this tendency to isolate people because the demands of professional responsibility are so high. And Larry carried so much of this load. And there was a certain quality about him that he didn't get out quite often enough. And it was just so precocious and so genuine and authentic that, you know, even you know, we know what it's like growing up as kids. Kids are not exactly kind to each other. And Larry was teased quite a bit in high school. And he would share with us how Zev, for example, one of our supervisors, a classmate, teased him quite hard, you know, a mean teaser, not a nice teaser. But Larry would persevere. Larry had a way to deflect and to hang in there. Let me just say that, you know, many of us are believers, and many of us are searching or have decided that there is really not a transcendent and all that sort of thing. But for someone who was searching, and hopefully near the end, it looked like he was really coming into some acceptance, that he did so many good acts that it's, you know, one has to, we're really in this world to make it a better world, a more just world, a more fair world, a more happier world. And that was Larry. I just want to share that he had so much humor in his heart that I know in the last several months, I know he got together with a friend of ours, Mike Sinkoff. Many of us may know him. He's another attorney that participated on so many of these great cases through the years. And at that time, this was several months ago, it was unknown to Michelle or me or others, that Larry knew that he was very, very ill. And he expressed to Mike how he wanted things to go after his death, etc. But the fact is I was just so happy that sensing that something was going downhill, at the end, when I would come to visit, I would say, Larry, have I told you how much I love you today? And it would be a bit, you know, it's a guy-to-guy thing, you know, you can't be like too gushy or maudlin or anything, but I really meant it, you know, because Larry gave a lot. Larry was very generous, and often, I mean, quite frankly, he was generous in some instances where he really should have been compensated more, because that caused problems for him financially. But still, he gave, and he gave for the cause. And so, I'm glad to see many of you, meet many of you, and I really wish that there's a special place for Larry, and that he's there now, looking at us, huh? Thank you very much.
Well, I hardly knew him. Our lives intersected some years ago because I'm a member of the Citizens Committee to Save Elysian Park. And a few years ago, that committee, along with the Solano Canyon Association, I may not even have the name right, but it's Solano Canyon, we made a lawsuit against Caltrans to try to stop them from widening the Arroyo Seco Freeway. It's called the Pasadena Freeway, taking hundreds of mature trees, and we felt that was wrong, and it wouldn't accomplish very much anyway. So there was a state case, and we had a private attorney, but it was the federal case. We lost both, but Larry came in on the second, on the federal, and gave of his time and energy to try to help us. What did come out was that hundreds of trees had to be planted as a give back, and the Citizens Committee went with the park people and Caltrans, the kinds of trees we wanted and where they were to go in Elysian Park. Another point is Michael Sinkoff helped on that as well. Now, the judge who handled the federal was the same woman who made the ambassador go down. And I knew the minute I saw her name, they're going to lose. I don't care who you're going to lose. But I don't agree with you. I think the Conservancy was on the right track. I think an alternate use, we won't argue about it. But, so I'm sorry now, after I hear all these marvelous things, I didn't get to know him better. But if he did enter into that moment, then I wanted to give him credit for the effort to save those trees. Oh, one last point. One last point. The Citizens Committee to Save Elysian Park on November 19 is having its annual tree planting in Elysian Park in the Arboretum area at, I'm not sure of the time, but if you're interested in attending, a tree will be planted by the committee for him. I don't know the type, so if you want, let me know, and I'll see that you get the information.
Excellent, thank you. Alrighty, it's getting quite late, and our accompanist is already, I think, a half hour late for another engagement because there were so many warm and wonderful thoughts that people had to share about Larry. Very briefly, I know many people wanted sort of a brief update on what's happening in the Sirhan case at this point in time, because that was truly among Larry's greatest concerns in the last days of his life, was that the case to which he had devoted so much time and energy would not fall apart in the void. We've been continuing working on it. There is another prominent political attorney who is very interested in the case and flew out to California last month to meet with me and with Sirhan's brother Munir and discuss the case, and he's planning to come back out here again. And the current focus of everyone's time and attention is that Sirhan is at this time living in tremendously inhumane and conditions in prison, being allowed only 7 minutes a day out of his cell, and that has been that way for 3 years. So, and Larry had been fighting with that issue as well while he was still alive. So we are taking a fresh look at the cruel and unusual punishment issues and Eighth Amendment issues regarding detention conditions. It is a separate issue from the overall case and the evidence. So we will be continuing to work on that. The new attorney wants to make that the first point of his focus, so that Sirhan's living conditions will be better in the present day while other things are still being worked on. So that is the most important focus right at this current moment, and we're working on establishing a fund. The lawyer who is interested in taking a case feels that there are many good issues and the opportunity to continue to bring out evidence. Larry's habeas corpus petition, which was his largest issue that he had been working on for Sirhan, addressing the original conviction and the evidence and the counsel who had been compromised, that is still alive and well, and the judge has granted a significant continuance in that case for new counsel to be obtained for Sirhan. So on the positive side of Larry's work, his work is continuing, and people will be continuing where he left off, so that it will not be in vain, and that there will still be hope that all that he worked so hard for will go on without him. So.
I think it's pertinent. Briefly tell them why he's in solitary.
Oh, well, yes, that is...
It's germane to the present.
Yes, well, apparently it has to do with 9/11, and they're trying to make some erroneous allegations that he could have had some foreknowledge of terrorism, which is so patently absurd, of course. I mean, since he's been in prison since 1968, it's so absurd that I forgot to mention it. But yes, the issues that need to be currently addressed regarding his detention are based on some very erroneous assumptions. So those will all be addressed, and we will update people as things go along in his case. So I'd like to again thank you all for coming today. Our accompanist will lead us out, and we have some brief refreshment sandwiches and coffee and things like that if you'd like to join us in the hall next door for a bite to eat before you go home. We'd like that very much. Okay? Thank you again.
remember that, but I know that there was a time when you were getting all the insurance up, and my son came to us, and got everybody in there. Yeah, she brought the kids.
Yeah, we did. Thanks for coming. So much for inviting.